The Michael Berry Show.
Eithan Haim is a story that is a roller coaster of emotions. A very young doctor. You know, young in your career, it's harder to speak out and speak up in a Karen Silkwood sort of way as a whistleblower because you don't have the credibility. I can call out anything these days because I'm established. But when you're starting in your career, you don't have that capital that you can employ to defend against claims that, you know, you're a bad guy or you can get fired. Well, Eitan Haim was at a Houston hospital where he discovered mutilation of children, young children, by the medical establishment. And he worked very hard to expose this in order to end it, got a state law changed as a result of it. And the thanks he got from the hospital system and authorities was that he was prosecuted criminally. It's an awful, awful story, but this guy gets knocked down but gets back up again. He was in front of Congress this week, and my, oh my, how this story, how it has turned. And he is the triumphant Paul Revere in the era of goodness, and we're honored to have him on the show. Eitan, welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back on.
So it's a very different mood than once when we talked, and I thought this poor guy, he got swallowed up in the swamp. Let's go back to give a brief explanation of what brought you to the attention, what you did and why you did it originally.
Yeah, it's really been a wild story. But yeah, my name is Eitan Haim. I was a general surgery resident at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, between 2018 and 2023. One of Baylor's primary affiliate hospitals, like its primary training hospitals, is Texas Children's, the largest children's hospital in the world. They said that they were shutting down their transgender program in March 2022. That was in response to a Texas Attorney General opinion a few weeks before that said it could constitute criminal child abuse, right? So they said they're shutting it down, right? Nothing to see here. Well, I worked there. I knew that was a lie. Over the next couple of months after March 2022, I saw that they not only continued the program, but expanded it right into a multidisciplinary clinic. It was a hospital-wide priority. So I didn't believe it for months, but then I saw how egregious the deception really was. So then I blew the whistle on May 16th, 2023. I was an anonymous whistleblower in a story by the investigative journalist Christopher Rufo. And, it revealed TCH's deception. No identifiable information was released. It was like the same de-identified hospital data they released to news organizations about infectious diseases, right? So the story comes out, gets really big. No one knows who I am. The day later, Texas passes SB 14, right, which bans these transgender interventions on children. So within 24 hours, for a story coming out, what we exposed was made illegal. And then the AG announces an investigation in TCH that more whistleblowers speak out. And, I just go on with my life, right? A month later, agents came to my home. It was June 23rd, 2023, the day of my graduation from surgical training, one of the most important days of my life. Two armed agents with the HHS show up, and I find out I'm being investigated by the federal government. And then what followed after that was this, kind of cyclone of the most corrupt prosecutors, FBI agents, the most insane criminal prosecution of all time, where they used HIPAA, and instead of making it about patient privacy, right, they made it about protecting multi-billion-dollar hospital systems. And I mean that literally, because the victims in the indictment were TCH and its physicians. No mention of patients. And it turns out that the lead prosecutor bringing the case, right, you couldn't throw a tennis ball at Tina Ansari, the lead prosecutor, her Thanksgiving dinner without hitting, a major TCH or Baylor donor, or a former TCH board member, or a CEO who has contracts with hospitals within the Baylor TCH academic consortium. So the person who was criminally prosecuting me, right, trying to send me to prison for being a whistleblower, was the same person who had the primary interest in seeing these institutions protected, right, which is third world level corruption. after we made that known, that was in November 2024, she stepped down. But then after that, right, the DOJ pursued a gag order on me, right, because I was just criticizing the government, and because the judge was in on the corruption as well. He doesn't sign the gag order; he just threatens to send me to jail. So he successfully gags me for about a month and a half. But then after the inauguration, things really spin out of control, because at that point we were $1 million in debt. The DOJ was accelerating the case even after Trump's executive order ending the weaponization of the DOJ. And every single day that the DOJ accelerated, this was another $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 for us. So we were getting desperate. So I violated the judge's corrupt de facto gag order, and then the judge just completely went insane. This is Judge Hittner. He's based in Houston in the Southern District. And then January 23rd, the day before my case was dismissed, my attorneys were told that he was going to send me to jail the next day unless I signed an agreement with the government. So he was essentially extorting me. And he was also going to move my trial to that Monday. So, I essentially held up the middle finger to him and said, then do it, because I continued to speak out, because I violated his gag order. And, luckily, the stars kind of aligned. Josh Hawley, a bunch of people in D.C. kind of, made sure the right things happen, and this guy doesn't this judge doesn't, send me to jail, and they were able to have the case dismissed with prejudice. And it also helped that the politically appointed a U.S. attorney in the Southern District in Houston was gone by that point, because everyone knew this case was corrupt. So the day after I was about to go to jail,
hold on just a second. Hold on just a second.
The case was
this story has a happy ending, folks. A very happy ending. So hang tight.
The term anal intercourse on your program.
The Michael Berry Show.
Sure, if it's relevant to the story for journalistic purposes. Eithan Haim is, in my opinion, up there with Karen Silkwood, Paul Revere, as someone who became the tip of the spear to stand up for what was right at great peril to himself. And we'd like to think that every time you do the right thing, a parade is held in your honor and you are held out as a hero, but we know that's not true. The reason we say don't lightly step out there and do that is you might get crushed. And he did get crushed. Let's be clear. He did get crushed. And somehow out of all of that, this guy, it's amazing. It really is. The glories of the fact that he is now testifying before Congress and writing things like, it was a real joy to get to tell my story, because most people would have turned tail and hidden. Well, why didn't you do the right thing? Well, I didn't. This guy did the right thing, and we cannot extol his virtues enough. There should be a parade in his honor, because he did do the right thing. Eithan, all right, so catch us up on the case from there.
Yeah, so sorry, that was quite a long explanation, but it's a very convoluted, crazy story. And so really the ultimate thing that happened was that at the last possible moment, at the most dramatic point possible, when I was on the verge of going to jail after being extorted by a corrupt judge in Houston, the case was dismissed with prejudice so that it could never be brought again. That was on Friday, January 25th. And then that Sunday, I get a call, and, it was amazing. Josh Hawley had invited me to President Trump's first State of the Union, and then now yesterday I testified. So, and you're correct, it's like I was being crushed. I mean, for the past 2 years was just one continuous kind of episode of me being crushed time after time. But I just knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't fight back, because in the middle of all this, my wife and I had our first baby daughter. Right. It was September 25th. And I had to leave that after my wife had an emergency C-section. And while she was in post-op, I had to leave my wife and my newborn baby daughter to go to court the next day. And it was, so painful. But it's like, if I'm bringing my child into this world, it doesn't, the praise don't matter. The praise doesn't matter. It's like, I just have to do it, because I don't want to deliver her into a world where this can happen, because It's like,
Eithan, as bad as I feel for you,
if we don't
and
do
it's
something,
awful,
how can we ever deliver them into that?
I feel bad for your wife. She had to go through pregnancy through all this. She's just given a baby.
And she was a
The
DOJ
man she
prosecutor
loves,
at the
the
time.
child.
She was working.
Ugh. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, she was working in the Northern District of Texas. The prosecutor coming after me, my wife held the same position as her, but just in a different district. So she was working in the DOJ every day of the week when she was like fully pregnant, and this case was going on, and they were trying to send me to prison for 10 years. It was totally insane. That's why she had to have an emergency C-section. It's because her blood pressure was really high, right? Like, we didn't expect to go in on that day on September 25th, you know? But it's because all this was going on. Thank God she's okay.
So you have recovered. You're the better for it if you do have some scars to show. Tell me how it felt speaking before Congress.
Man, it was amazing. And, you know, especially it's like you go through so much, you know, we're still $1 million in debt, you know, and if anyone, you know, we still, anyone can donate, givesendgo.com/Texas_whistleblower. We're forever grateful for it. And we'll pay it off over time. You know, we'll probably pay legal bills with Social Security checks, but it is what it is. But to be able to speak in front of Congress yesterday was one of the greatest things ever, because especially going toe-to-toe with these Democrats, you know, these people, they stand up there and they lie. They lie in the most vicious way possible, because they just repeated the allegations that were already disproven in a court in the Southern District of Texas. Everything they said was a blatant lie, and somehow they have the audacity to stand up there and repeat it. And, you know, just to be able to look Jamie Raskin, a slimy, like, you know, little goblin person, right in his dirty little eyes, and just make him look like a fool, was the single greatest thing in my entire life, other than marrying my wife and my child being born. So it's number 3 probably.
How old are you?
35.
Man, you have lived a lot of life in a brief period of time.
Yeah.
If I were a betting
you know,
man, good.
Yeah, there's so many crazy things that have happened behind the scenes. You know, I guess it's just one of those things that when you go through something like this, it's just the nature of it. You know, these crazy things happen, but it's just like, if you just stick with it and just tell the truth and do the right thing and treat people with respect, and, you know, then things kind of work out. And, you know, it's like you realize, like, yeah, you know, we lost all this money, we lost everything we ever had, but, you know, we're still healthy. You know, we still have our family, and I mean, that's the most important thing. So
you took on Texas Children's Hospital. You took on the medical regulators. You took on the entirety of the government, our court system, our everything, because you believed, I don't want to put words in your mouth, you believed, you saw that children were being mutilated in violation of Texas law, and that was evil, right?
In violation, and I believe this has always been illegal, but worse, is in violation of divine law, of God's law, right? These children are created perfect. And what these doctors were doing is destroying their bodies so that they're going to get put down this road that they can never come back from. And it's like, what's being taken away from them is something they can't even fathom. Because once I looked into my daughter's eyes and I held her for the first time, it's like this, I realized that's what life is, right? To have a child and to bring someone into this world is the most, it's can't
glorious,
even describe
and
it.
they should be protected. Hey, Tom, I'm going to interrupt you because I have a minute left. I want you to take a minute, and it'll crash into the break. You told the story about these fake, they cut off these boys' wieners and they create a fake female organ, and you told about their anus leaking into that and all that goes wrong. People need to understand how brutal this is. Tell that to the break, if you would.
Yeah. So it's I see these pathologies when they're like caused by cancer, right? When they're obstructing the urethra or the bladder, or you have fistulas from, for example, diverticulitis. And so you have these connections formed between different organs, because that's the nature of healing. And what these quote unquote neovaginas are just large healing chronic wounds. So the cells grow together. You know, I have patients who they will urinate stool, right? Because of these connections. These are a not uncommon a shockingly frequent complication from all these surgeries. And and I know some of the people who've undergone them, detransitioners, and I mean the life they lead. It's just so hard. Thank you for having me on.
You're an American hero, Eithan. You're an American hero, Dr. Eithan Haim.
Bring it on, because there is nothing here.
The Michael Berry Show.